Alrighty, looks like we are live. Welcome everyone to another Properties and Beers. You know what? Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Rates rose again the other day, and for a lot of investors, that changes the pressure in the background. Holding costs matter more. Cash buffers get tested, and decisions they get that and decisions that felt comfortable a year ago start to feel tighter. And that's why I want to talk to you about cash flow becoming harder to ignore and how it connects to NDI Specialist Disability Accommodation and share a real experience that I had recently that puts it all into perspective. All right, welcome everyone. If you're just jumping in now, come say hello in the comments. For those that don't know me, my name is Goro Gupta, CEO and founder of Ethical Property Investments. We work with everyday Aussies, just people just like you and me, to invest in ethical, high cash flow housing, homes that generally do good for residents and still hold up as long-term investments. Um, Quick note before we get into it, we actually ran this live stream last week, but the sound didn't get to make it through properly. So we're doing it properly. And again, this time I'll be doing it from India, from New Delhi, right? So let's have a chat about what we're having for beverage. So it isn't beer o'clock yet. There is a time difference. So I'm having two beverages. One, because those that don't know, I'm just recovering from dengue fever. I've got some coconut water, which really helps out with this dengue fever. But also, I need some energy because it's lunchtime. It's almost morning. So this is for those that aren't aware. Thumbs up. My favorite, cola drink. They brought out a sugar-free version that has extra caffeine. So let's give this a go. Delicious. It kind of tastes like a less sweeter Pepsi Max, right? So I wanted to start with the latest RBA decision and what that means for investors. Something something that I was looking at actually came up during the handover of my own SDA property a few days ago, and I finally want to talk about what happens when an SDA property is completed. But before that, let's start with the rate decision. The RBA lifted rates again, and that sucks, my friends. They took the cash rate to 3.85. And for many investors, that changes the conversation very quickly. Negative gearing really starts feeling tighter. Holding costs matter more. And cash flow, they kind of moves to the closer of the center of decision making. And what used to feel manageable on paper can start feeling uncomfortable in real life. And this, my friends, is where I've noticed a shift in the questions that people are asking. It's less about growth stories and more about sustainability. People are saying, people come to me, hey, I've got lower borrowing capacity, or I've got, I don't want to talk about growth so much. I want something that's going to take care of the property. People want to know how investment's going to behave when rates moves, and how it's going to hold up when rates do rise, and whether it adds to the pressure or removes it. And I think that's key, right? I'm going to repeat that again because it's so powerful. Does your property add to the pressure or remove it? And that's why both co-living and STA keeps coming up in conversations. Look, not as a solution for everyone. It's definitely not for everyone, right? But it's a cash flow strategy that works in very specific circumstances for very specific investors. Typical STA income, once the property is tenanted, sits anywhere between $80,000 to $250,000 per property. That's right. Up to 250. One real example, we work with a client that generates $257,000 per year, and which is actually 16% gross yield roughly. And that's not, I'm just sharing that to impress anyone. I'm sharing that to really impress upon you, as Tony Robbins says, right? How the numbers can work and what the structure, location, and what happens when you put the structure, the location, and execution the right way. At the end of the day, there was more money put into the property that was needed. People were worried about capital value, but hey, this particular investor was worried more about cash flow, and that's what mattered, his suitability, right? And I'll be sharing something pretty cool later on. By the way, if you're watching, come say hi, drop me a line. I'm watching all the comments there. Now, let's talk about the context of investing in SDA. It's not for everyone, but if you're keen, we are going to be running a webinar in a couple of weeks' time. So just last week, I was actually at the handover of my own SDA property. Yes, I let the cat out of the bag. That was actually my own property I was talking about. This is a property that cost around $1.6 million. And I even put more money into it after the property was built, just to make sure the landscaping was done right, another 30K. So I believe here's the thing, right? Part of what we do at Ethical Property Investments is that I believe that if you believe in something enough to recommend it, you should be willing to invest in it yourself. And that's always been my view. When you walk through a property at handover, the numbers fade into background. You're no longer looking at like a spreadsheet or PIA or projections, right? You're looking at the finishes and how the space feels. You're noticing how things that you never see on the plans, like, oh, this room looks bigger than I thought it would be, or this one needs adjustment. One thing that stood out to me again is how important pride of ownership actually is. And if you wouldn't feel comfortable living in the property yourself, it's very hard to expect someone with a disability to feel at home there. So this isn't short-term accommodation. This is not an institution, right? We, for so many residents, this could be their forever home. Possibly the last home that they ever live in, and that, my friend, shifts how you think about quality. Layout matters. Nice light matters. Like natural light, right? Space and finish, they really matter. Not because they look good in photos, but because, someone's life is inside those walls. Even at handover, there are small items that really need to be rectified, and that's normal. But it reinforces why handovers matter so much. And if something's not right on day one, it becomes much harder to fix later. And when you're investing at this level, at $1.6 million, you want to make sure things are done properly from the start. My friends, that applies to SDA. It applies to any property, whether it's co-living, SDA, or what have you, right? I need another drink. So, sorry. There's a part that stays with me after that day. Handover really isn't the end of the journey. It's where the real test begins. Once the keys are handed over, the property enters the real world, right? Support coordinators are walking through, care providers, they assess whether it's actually working. Families form opinions and residents experience it every single day. That's why SDA investing becomes very different from how it's often presented. Because, my friends, reputation matters, right? Providers are talking to each other. Support coordinators are all talking to each other, and feedback travels quietly, right? If a property feels awkward, overly clinical, or poorly finished, or even worse, in the wrong location. And location, my friends, it's a real estate adage. Demand doesn't just disappear overnight. It slowly weakens. And over time, these properties become really much harder to place, harder to keep occupied, and harder to rely on. The real question investors should be asking isn't whether a property will get approved, it's whether people choose to live in it for 5 years from now. And, as an investor, are you willing to hold on to the asset, potentially vacant for months? And that's why quality and livability, I believe we're talking about more than just ethical considerations. Quality and livability are the considerations, and they're often overlooked when SCA is discussed too quickly. So here's the thing. We are running our next session on SDA, and it's called the NDI's SDA Reality Check on Tuesday, February 19th. That's right. We're hosting a live webinar called the NDI's SDA Reality Check. And guess what? I'm actually going to be holding it in that very house. I'm going to be holding it in a live SDA house that's, got the tenants ready to come in. We're just waiting for registration of that property. And it's here for clarity. SDA isn't for everyone, and it shouldn't be treated like it is, right? But in the session, we're going to walk through where SDA generally works, where it doesn't work, and what risks to be aware of, and what needs to be planned for SDA to actually work long term. And we're going to talk about how income's structured, how cash flow behaves, and even when rates move up, right, you're less impacted. You're still impacted, right? Let's be honest. These rate hikes hurt, and they suck, right? Let's talk about how do we lessen the impact, and that's what we need to do about preparing before even considering SDA. So if you're feeling the pressure of rising rates, or you're simply assessing a portfolio in a high cost environment, this session might help you think more clearly. And we're going to have some other non-SDA options there as well. So if you find you'll find the reg link in the comment. And if tonight's conversation resonates, I'd strongly encourage you to attend. And, I'll leave it there for tonight, but got to finish this thumbs up, right? Before you jump up, one quick reminder. A large number of people watching these live streams have not followed our page yet, which means you're probably missing out on all the content that could help you make better decisions over time. And on Facebook, Ethical Property Investments, where we share grounded conversations around ethical investing, SCA realities, and long-term strategies. Now, my friends, if this topic's been useful, hit follow to the discussion shop on your feed. You don't want to miss out what's coming next. So thanks for spending time with me tonight. I really appreciate you. And if the event about the NDI's SDA Reality Check sounds relevant, register through the link, and I'll see you on Tuesday. It's too good. Make money. Thanks, guys. Cheers.